Okay.
Happy?
Yeah.
Are we recording?
Just started.
By the way, sound quality fine?
Yeah.
You happy with
It's
what
just
James-
content that's the problem. We're running low in language, as you can probably tell. That was my attempt to say in Arabic, Achtung, Achtung. That's the sound that rang out across North Africa when Rommel and Eighth Army chased each other backwards and forwards, isn't it, James?
Yeah, absolutely. But what are we going to do when we've run out completely? Are we going to go back to acting and start
I think
all
we're going
over
to have
again?
to, yeah. Right, so for those of you new to our podcast, and welcome all new fellow travellers, and wondering what on earth you've stumbled into, this is We Have Ways of Making You Talk, the Second World War podcast that will not help any GCSE student looking to develop a linear and coherent argument. Last night, my daughter said, I've got Nazis tomorrow. No Nazis
She was
tomorrow.
obviously really thrilled about
Yeah,
that.
you're thrilled about her GCSEs. I'm Al Murray.
And I'm James Holland, trying to bring the smallest semblance of good sense to proceedings.
Good luck with that, with your wobbly lower lip. Now, we get a lot of correspondence, I'm pleased to say. Not all of it correcting me on my knowledge of the war in the East. Lately, we've had a couple of requests from listeners with one eye on their summer holidays. Vincent wrote to say, thoroughly enjoying the podcast. Very interesting and entertaining. We like you too, Vince. Do you have, or could you recommend, a good World War II reading list? And Dean Richardson also wrote to say, other than James's new book, you've got a book out, James.
Yeah, I have actually. It's called Normandy 44, and it's available in all good bookshops now.
And other bookshops, not just the good ones.
Yeah, no, really bad bookshops as well.
What Second World War history books would you recommend? I've read and enjoyed Anthony Beevor's and Max Hastings' collections. Well, books.
Yeah, well, I mean, Summer Holidays, it's great reading non-fiction, but I quite like reading novels as well.
Yeah.
I'm really sad. I've just finished the last Bernie Gunter novel by
Right.
Philip Kerr. Unfortunately, Philip died really young of cancer last year. And so he has this private detective. Well, he's a detective. Sometimes he's in the German police force, sometimes he's in the SS, but he goes through from before the Second World War, during the Second World War, and after the Second World War. And it's sort of done like a kind of Philip Marlowe character. So he's a kind of sort of, noirish detective, wisecracking, kind of unlucky in love, likes his liquor and his cigarettes and all the rest of it. And actually, they're brilliant on audiobook because the guy who reads them is an American, and he reads it. They're all written in the first person, and he reads it in an American accent, unless they're a German, in which he puts on a German accent. Apart from Bernie Gunter, who obviously is German, but is read as an American, if you see what I mean. And it shouldn't work, but it absolutely does, and they're completely brilliant. But anyway, I think there's 13 or 14 novels, that every single one is an utter joy from start to finish. But if I was to pick out one to get started, it would be Prague Fatale.
Prague
Fatale. It's just
That
totally,
sounds like a cologne.
utterly fantastic.
Sounds like aftershave. I'm wearing my Prague Fatale this evening.
Yeah, it does a bit. I'll give you that. But actually, it's all about Heydrich.
Right, okay.
So the association for me isn't there at all.
Right.
But yeah, that's absolutely true.
Okay. Well, I would recommend, if we're going to do fiction, there's a novel about the Battle of Arnhem from the late 60s that I remember reading ages ago, and I've gone back to it because it's very evocative, called The Cauldron by a guy who called himself Zeno. So it's an anonymous a novelisation of his experiences in Arnhem. And there's a character in it, unsubtly named, called Bridgman, Lieutenant Bridgman, who at the end of the book refuses to be evacuated, has to go back, and he's likens himself to your brother would know this, the Romans defending the bridge on the Tiber,
Right.
and all that stuff.
Yeah,
And
but I don't know it at all.
No, there's no point asking you about that. And but it's he was in the Pathfinder company who landed first on 17th of September. This guy, and so it's about that, really. It's about being in the Pathfinder company, and they lay their Eureka beacons, and it's all going fine, and they think it's all going perfectly, and then obviously it unravels and goes to shit. And the story follows, I think, his section as they're killed one by one in the battle, and it's not an eyewitness account. It's not really, but it is. It's an incredibly evocative account of the battle, and in fact, it turns up in It Never Snows in September. He quotes a bit in.
So
that.
was the author there?
Yeah.
So he's a bit like Alexander Barron,
Yeah.
who wrote From the City, from the Plough.
Yeah. He was in the Path. He was in the Pathfinder Company. It's if you could, I don't know if it's in print still, but it's worth a read. It's if you like your Arnhem, it's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I love reading novels about I don't read anything about the Second World War, but novels, but they have to be really well researched.
Yeah,
because there's nothing more annoying.
Yeah, well, he was there. That's the
So there is that
he was
kind
their
of
book.
Yeah. Again, a bit like that Alexander Barron, which I just mentioned. You kind of get that sense of it, don't you? But I suppose there's been some absolute belters over the last few years, haven't there? There's been some really good memoirs actually. Before it's too late, and one I would always recommend is First Light by Geoffrey Wellham.
Yeah.
Which is just an absolute cracker. And actually, I was sort of slightly involved in that, not in writing. Obviously, that was all Jeff. But so way back when, I was researching my own novel, which was set in the backdrop of the Battle of Britain. I started kind of going to interview lots of veterans.
Yeah.
This was the first bit of historical research in the Second World War that I ever did. And actually, the book did eventually come out. But one of the people I wrote to was Geoffrey Wellham. I saw him on a list somewhere, and a letter came back from Mullion in Cornwall.
Yep.
So I went off to go and see him, and I had this fantastic day with him. It was in 2001, I think it was, and it was just brilliant. And we went and met at his local pub, and you could still smoke in pubs in those days, so there were ashtrays and things. And he was using his pint and his ashtray to kind of simulate his Spitfire and a Messerschmitt 109. So there I was in my Spit and this 109. It was just exactly how you imagine when you haven't done this before, what it's going to be like having a kind of one-on-one session with a former Battle of Britain fighter pilot. And he was completely brilliant. Anyway, in the course of the conversation, he said, by the way, one thing you might find quite useful. Back in the 70s, I was going through a very bad divorce, and, my business had gone tits up. And, I was sort of sitting around thinking about the time when I'd actually done something half useful. And I started jotting down a few thoughts. Anyway, there's a sort of, ended up being a little book kind of thing. And he said, there's a chapter in it, which is sort of effectively a day in the life of Battle of Britain fighter pilot. Would that be interesting to you? And I went, yeah, it'd be absolutely amazing. Anyway, then, and I went and had a coffee at his house, and we talked about it a bit more. And his house was absolutely tiny. I mean, he was poor as a church mouse. And afterwards, I wrote back to him and said, it's great seeing you. Thank you so much for all your time. You mentioned this chapter. Any chance of seeing the whole book? And literally 3 days later, the manuscript of First Light arrived in the post.
Wow.
And it wasn't a spare one. And it wasn't
the manuscript.
It wasn't recorded delivery. It just had a few stamps on it. He'd obviously taken to his local post office in Mullion and put it in the post. Still had his little sort of penciled annotations, sort of badly typed. It was the whole thing. Anyway, I read it, and of course it was absolutely amazing. And at the time, before I'd become kind of full-time historian writer, I was working for Penguin Books. So I gave it first to Roland White, and he said, well, I absolutely love this, but this is not the sort of thing I can do. Give it to Elio. Elio Gordon was Anthony Beevor's editor on Stalingrad and various others. And Elio read it and absolutely loved it. And we wanted to put an offer to him straight away. And the person who was going to sign off the offer was about to go on holiday for 3 weeks. So if we hadn't got an answer from him that afternoon, it would have been another 3 weeks. And I couldn't get hold of him. And I rang up my wife, Rachel, and I said, God, we've got to get hold of Jeff because it's really exciting. We want to publish a book and everything, but we need to find him now. And she goes, well, why don't you just ring the pub? So I did. I rang the pub and I said, Jeff, Penguin want to publish. And he just went, bloody hell. But anyway, I think in the first decade of this century, it was the best-selling military book in the UK.
Wow.
And, he got himself a girlfriend and a kind of Rover 75 with leather seats and kind of upgraded his house and, was sort of fated quite rightly. And he got, quite a lot of... he had quite a lot, he was quite famous by the end of his life. Sadly, he passed away last July. That was just such a loss when he went. I couldn't believe it. Because even when he was getting older, he was still Jeff. Yeah. And Jeff was, he'd earned the right to not give a shit about anything or what he said. And he just said what he thought. And he was completely brilliant and really good fun. We remained, good friends right until the very end.
Brilliant. So First Light by Geoffrey Wellham. And a book that would accompany that would be Geoffrey Quill's memoir about the Spitfire. Which I don't know.
Cypher Merlin, is that him? Or was that Alex Henshaw? I can't remember.
No, that's not him. I think his is just called Spitfire, I think.
Yeah.
And he was Supermarine's second test pilot. So Mutt Summers flew the first plane, and then Quill took over basically.
Yeah.
And it is the most. I mean, if what you want is I took the Mark 14 up and I was not happy with the ailerons. If that's what you want as you lie by a swimming pool, that's the book for you. I mean, it's exhaustive and arguably exhausting detail on testing every single possible version of Spitfire. So well worth the read.
But there are also some absolutely amazing memoirs out there. Obviously, George MacDonald Fraser.
Yeah.
Which is completely
God,
brilliant.
it's extraordinary.
Totally brilliant.
Yeah.
But then there's Memoirs of Rifleman Balby, which is also absolutely brilliant, about a guy in the Rifle Brigade going up through Italy. Brilliant book. And one I'm quite new to is And No Birds Can Sing by Farley Mowat, who is a Canadian. I mean, he's quite famous in Canada as a writer, but goes all the way through Sicily and Italy, and it's just fantastically good.
Yeah,
it really, really is. Another one I've just come across, Bert Stiles. What's it called? Serenade for the Big Bird or something like that, or Bluebird. Serenade for the Big Bird, I think it's called. And it's all about being a bomber pilot. And it covers the D-Day period. Right. And it's just this brilliant memoir. It's really absolutely in the moment. And the amazing thing about Bert Stiles is he's one of the very, very few people who's a bomber pilot, reassigns to become a fighter pilot, and then gets killed in November 1944 as a fighter pilot.
Gosh.
Having done the hard bit, which is being a bomber pilot, which is much more dangerous than being a fighter pilot.
Gosh.
And it's really, really fantastic.
What's that called again?
It's called Serenade to the Big Bird, I think it is. And it's a slim volume, but there is a kind of real raw honesty to it, and it is absolutely beautifully written. Yeah. It's really it's funny, it's dark, it's moving. And apparently it's a complete classic, but I only literally just discovered it, and it's still in print. It's
the same category as that would be Keith Douglas's Alamain's Zemzem.
Oh, God,
I think which we've talked about before, because I think the thing that's really interesting is those things that are written at the time.
Yes,
they haven't had what he's not done is gone away and
gone, dear audience, my dear reader, kind of
restructured his memories, or also held back from some things possibly because there's things you don't want to share and all that sort of thing, because of course veteran testimony is really important, but a lot of it the further it gets so if a guy writes a thing basically when he's on furlough before he's then killed doing the next thing, which is the same thing with Keith Douglas's stuff. It's because he's killed on D+1, isn't it?
8th of June,
8th of June, D+2. But it means that memoir is that the paint's still wet on it when he's killed. So I'll Serenade for the Big Bird. Okay,
very amusing. Just say one last thing about that Alamain's Zemzem. So
it's such a good book.
Stanley Christopherson is Edward in Alamein to Zemzem.
Right.
He changes all the names,
but
they're very sort of thinly disguised. And he's quite rude about Stanley, even though he was his second in command in A Squadron at the beginning of the Normandy campaign before he died. And because Stanley has this kind of very easy charm, and Keith Douglas has this massive chip on his shoulder, social chip on his shoulder.
Yeah.
And what's really funny is what Stanley really objected to was not the portrayal of him as being this kind of sort of slight, so charming he's light.
Yeah.
Is the fact that he criticises his dancing capabilities. But it's very, very funny as well at times.
Yeah, it's a great book. The whole thing where he just
moving
turns up with his unit, and they're like, "Well, you're not meant to be here."
And those amazing sketches
stick him in
as well.
Stick him in a tank. As well. Yeah. Okay, so questions. Hugh Wilton. I tell you what, Hugh hasn't done is started with, "I really like the podcast." So I'm a bit ambivalent about reading this out. But there we go. Was Colditz a mistake by the Germans? ? To get in, you had to be an officer, therefore smarter than the average. Well,
I'm not sure about that.
Contentious, and 2, had already escaped or attempted escape, so practiced all in one place. Well, yeah, it is a peculiar thing, the idea that you put all your eggs in one basket, isn't it? All your, as it were, all these people, and create an escape culture. It's a very odd thing, isn't it? That they would do that. Because you'd think dilute their efforts by spreading them out across the system rather than...
Well, I suppose if you spread them out, then you've always got someone who's really ace at escaping in every single camp, and so you might have massive amount of escapes, where if you put them all under one roof, then at least it's only going to be one escape attempt because they'll all be in it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Colditz has just completely gone off the radar, but I mean, I remember in the sort of when I was growing up in the 70s, Colditz was like everything. I mean, it was Colditz TV programmes, there was Colditz board games.
Board game.
When I was being packed off to prep school, we always used to go, oh, got to go back to Colditz.
Yeah, Colditz was in the vernacular.
It was in the vernacular.
My boarding school as well. After
and it
Colditz,
isn't.
yeah.
It isn't anymore. And it's
And it was political too, because Airy Neve,
Yep.
who was Thatcher's sort of fix-it man, who the IRA murdered,
Yep.
he was Colditz, wasn't he? Am I
Yes,
right in
yes,
thinking?
yes, absolutely, yeah.
So Colditz was front and centre in 70s culture. I mean, it really
And Douglas
was.
Bader, wasn't Douglas Bader there?
Yeah, Bader was sent to Colditz in it. So for the uninitiated, Colditz is a castle.
And it's a big old castle.
And a big old pointy German castle. So
and it just says Gothic script.
yeah,
the
so if
moment
you think
look
of the
at it.
Disney castle, right, at the end, the
Without
Disney
quite so many
cartoon,
turrets.
but painted black,
Yeah.
right?
Overlooks the river.
with a
It's
swastika
incredibly
flag, right, and it's got a river and cliffs and everything. So if you think of like Disney gone bad,
Yeah.
right,
Really thick stone walls and
Yeah.
impregnable.
and they fill it with. And there's French prisoners there as well, aren't there? And
Yeah.
there's some Dutch people, I think, right? And the Germans fill it up with serial escapers and sort of celebrity prisoners and kind of
Yeah.
the sort of I mean,
And it's
interesting that Roger
cross-party
Bushell.
as
It's
well.
interesting that Roger Bushell, of course, Big X, who drives the Great Escape, didn't end up there actually, and maybe things would have turned out quite differently if he had. But it's basically it's sort of like your super cooler, isn't it? You put all your bad eggs in one basket.
But we grew up with it being. I mean, we were talking in the last podcast about sort of Russians against, or the Soviet Union against the West. Actually, I mean, we sort of viewed it as a sort of byword for kind of repression and kind of being incarcerated and grimness and all the rest of it. Actually, it's pretty cushy.
Well,
they got worse as the war progressed, but then
Yeah.
it got worse for all Germans because there wasn't much food.
Yeah.
But actually, compared to what the Russian prisoners had to go through, it was kind of holiday camp.
Yeah, exactly, because the Russian prisoners were either starved or worked to death. I mean, not to make no bones about it. I mean, you look at Colditz, and my memories of it is, them doing plays and dressing up and tunnelling out during a play, or using a play to. There's the amazing story about and I think
building gliders.
Yeah, they built a fucking glider. Right?
I mean, how do you do that? I still don't understand how that happened. How do they get the kit to build a
how are there any
glider?
floorboards left in the place? It's always they get it's pinching. I mean, because that's the other thing with the Great Escape.
There's only so many times you can sort of shuffle and whistle and kind of sort of look up at the ceiling, isn't there? When you haven't got any floorboards.
Who is it? I can't remember if it's Neve who actually they make a fake uniform and he walks out.
Yeah, he does. He gets out.
Walks out with a cardboard pistol and he walks out the door.
Yeah, he does.
And then I think he comes back.
Because I've read his book.
Yeah.
I had to do a new introduction to the folio edition I found a few years ago.
Yeah. But Colditz is, yes. And the thing is, I think Colditz, it's got 70s World War II glamour is what it turns into. It's one of those things that's glamorous about the Second World War because it is jolly chaps and all that sort of thing. And there is
guy from The Man from U.N.C.L.E. in the
that's
TV
right.
series.
Yeah, Dave McCallum. And because you've got this, but you've got this thing, haven't you? Though that with the escapes, the escapees, there was a lot of attention given to that, and it was an officer culture. And if you're other ranks, you're not. You're probably working, and you're working on a farm or something, and you've been put to work, haven't you? That's what happened.
Yeah.
So it is a bit weird that people fixated on the officer escape culture, and then Colditz is its sort of high watermark.
Yeah.
It's a bit peculiar because it's not most people's experience of being in the bag.
My mate Guy Walters, my great pal,
I went to his lecture at the RAF club. Yeah.
Oh right, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so he so two things. Some years ago, he emailed me, he said, Jim, I'm in Colditz, and I'm actually looking at the big house on the opposite side of the valley. It's for sale for €1. Should we buy it? But anyway, we didn't buy it.
€1?
It was up for €1. It was quite decrepit, but it was really seriously big old house.
Yeah.
And we thought it'd be funny. But we didn't. But a few years ago, he was talking to some bloke in Colditz, and he said, "Oh, you ever spoken to that bloke just down the road who's got that big barn full of stuff?" And a guy went, "No." And he goes, "Oh, I'll take you down there now." Anyway, so they went down. There's this sort of creaking old barn doors, lots of dust and all the rest of it. And leaning up against the wall was one of the original railway station signs, Colditz. So it's a big old chunk of hardwood, black rimmed, black Gothic, black right. It's not Gothic actually, but black writing, white background. And so the guy goes, "How much do you want for that?" And the guy goes, "A couple €100." Guy just went, done. So buys it.
Oh, wow.
It costs him, I think, €250 to get it
home,
get it home. It's so freaking heavy. It then costs him €300 to actually get it on the wall. But it is now on the wall in his old kids' playroom. It's absolutely brilliant. And he's got photos of these sort of British prisoners of war standing on the station with the sign. It's absolutely amazing.
Incredible. Well, so there we are, Colditz. So it wasn't a mistake because Guy Walters was able to decorate his kids' playroom. Okay, all good things.
Exactly.
All good things come to those who wait. Right. Okay, Pete B. Again, without praising the podcast, so I think we need to have a word with our listeners. Says, without fighter escort, were bombers doomed once attacked by fighters? And if so, weren't their defensive guns pointless? Now, that's really a question about American bomber effort, isn't it? Because the American bomber effort, the decision was that what you were going to do is flying fortress. The clues in the name is you'd have aircraft festooned with machine guns,
13 of them.
Yep, and they'd fly nice and close to each other. And the idea was any German fighter that wanted to get in amongst the bomber stream was going somewhere very dangerous.
Exactly. So the principle is the same as the convoy. Safety in numbers. You're all tight together.
Yeah.
You can protect yourself. And in fact, actually, I've written about this exstensively in another book that's available in all good and bad
That came out last year, though, didn't it? Yes, old news, James.
Hat now.
So whatever.
But anyway,
big week.
My book, big week. But it proved a kind of sort of false tactic, to be perfectly honest, because so the 8th Air Force first comes over in 1942, and then they get really badly sidetracked by going over to the Mediterranean. Lots of them get sort of rerouted down to the Med and fighting in North Africa and all the rest of it. So it's not really until the kind of summer of 1943 that they really get going. And by that time, they've come up with the Operation Point Blank, which is the plan to destroy the Luftwaffe as the number one bombing priority for the Allies.
Yeah.
Harris sort of goes along with it and says, yeah, whatever, and then just bombs his own thing. But the Americans are absolutely all out for the Luftwaffe.
The absolute key distinction is the British are bombing at night.
Yes.
They've been bombing at night pretty much from the start.
Yeah, as have the Germans, to be fair.
And the Germans.
Because it's less dangerous.
It's less dangerous. It is also less accurate.
Although, by the sort of second half of 1943, that is starting to change.
Well, yes, exactly. So the bomber command undergoes this massive sort of reorganisation, shakedown, kind of has a nervous breakdown because they're not getting it right, and they know they're not.
Butt report of summer of 1941.
They have to admit
can't
it.
hit a barn door at 20 yards.
That's right. Well, what is it? There's some percentage not even within 10 miles, and they count that as hitting the target and all sort of nonsense, right? So the Americans have the Norton bombs. The Norden bomb site, of course, which they spend billions on.
Yes, and it's developed in the 1920s, so it's kind of it's really.
And that's a computerized bomb site, and the big idea is you can land a bomb in a pickle barrel and all that stuff. And in fact, they almost spend as much money on that as they do on the atom bomb. I mean, it's that important to them, and they get this idea.
I think the B-29 project costs more than the atom bomb.
It does. Yeah, that's quite right. Yeah, but the big idea is they can bomb accurately. They can bomb in daylight.
Because you can see the target.
You can see the target. You have a lead bombardier, so that they form up on the lead aircraft that's picking the target and bombing on the target, and they're accurate. They're going on. And the American philosophy is that you bomb ball bearing factories, you bomb Messerschmitt factories.
Yes.
You bomb oil, the synthetic oil factory. You bomb the things that will bring Germany to its knees more swiftly. Whereas the bomber command have gone, well, we're bombing at night. And they call it dehousing. And what we'll do is dehouse the workforce and disrupt, because we'll try and hit the factory, but what we'll do is we'll bomb where they live, dehouse them, disrupt.
Well, the point is, if you destroy huge rafts of major modern cities, then their ability to kind of wage war is going to be massively reduced. And they are absolutely right.
Yeah, they is. But so the American bomber stream is like a convoy. It's bristling with machine guns. The idea is that any approaching Focke-Wulf, Messerschmitt, whatever, get shot down before it gets near the bomber stream.
And it's a spectacular number of bullets that are flying around. I mean,
Yeah.
it is absolutely, 13 times, 385.
50 caliber.
50 caliber machine guns, which pack a punch. I mean, 50
Yeah.
caliber are, .303s, which we have in our initially in our well, it's what we have in our Lancasters, but what we have initially in our sort of Hurricanes and Spitfires and Battle Britain are real pea shooters.
Yeah.
But 50 caliber really can pack a punch. It's a really effective kind of air-to-air weapon with high velocity, rapid rate of fire, all that kind of stuff. So,
But
it doesn't work.
So, for instance, Eighth Air Force's big first effort is the Schweinfurt Regensburg raids.
Yeah, in August 1943.
And those raids are what?
They lose 19% on that. Shot down,
Right, and
which is a
Schweinfurt
lot.
Regensburg,
So it's over 60.
They're in Bavaria, aren't they? So they've got to fly all the way across Germany,
Yes,
and
and that's the
all the
problem.
way back without fighter escort,
Yeah.
in daylight.
So what happens is the RAF fighters and the American fighter planes escort them as far as their range will allow them, so into France or whatever,
Yeah.
and then they kind of head home. And suddenly you're on your own, son, just at the point where the defences get much worse.
Well, and also the German German fighters don't come to play until the British and American fighters have gone home as well.
Yeah, quite sensibly.
Well, why would you bother?
No, exactly. When you're coming up against sort of superior fighters with
Yeah.
superior fighter pilots, so it's a real problem, and this is the kind of nub of the whole issue, because they need to destroy the Luftwaffe before D-Day,
Yep.
and they need to destroy their aircraft industry, but the aircraft industry is deep inside the Reich.
Yep.
So how do you square this peg? And they have another crack at it in October. They go back to Schweinfurt, and again they lose another 60 planes shot down, and it's and I think they lose something like 158 in 7 days, 158 heavy bombers. At this time, 8th Air Force has around 600, 700 bombers on the go at any one time. So that's just like a huge
It's like
amount.
a
That is
quarter.
totally unsustainable. Even when you're kind of American, you're mass producing these things like they're going out of fashion. I mean, it's just unsustainable. And the way these bomber bases are done is you have this bomber group of whatever it is, 3 squadrons on this base, and and everyone knows everyone. It's like a little village, little town all of its own. So when you come back and you're losing kind of, I don't know, 15-20% of your crews in one mission, the morale effect, the debilitating effect on morale is absolutely enormous. It's completely unsustainable. So they have to solve this problem of what you do with to get a long range fighter. And of course, the answer, of course, is the P-51 Mustang equipped with the Merlin engine. And they discover that not only does its performance massively improve, because the Allison engine, which powers the P-38 twin engine fighter, and the early Mustangs, is a total dog. But once you put the Merlin 60 engine in it, it totally transforms it. And actually, the higher it is, the higher the altitude, the greater the performance. And they suddenly realise, well, hang on a minute, what happens if you put an extra fuel tank behind the cockpit as well as in the wings? And they go, well, that's no problem at all. And they go, well, hang on a minute, what happens if you put 2 75-gallon drop tanks? And drop tanks are ones that you have, and once you've used them, you drop them. And so they're not causing so much drag and stuff, but so you use those to get you to Germany, and then once you get into action, then you drop them immediately. You press a button, it falls off into the ether, and off you go with the rest of the tanks, rest of the fuel you've got in it. And once you've got those, fuel tank in the fuselage plus 2 underside the wings, that means you can do 1,450 miles, which means you can go beyond Berlin and back, and that is a total game changer. So they discover this in the kind of late summer of 1943. They then, I think the first is the 354 fighter group is the first to be equipped with Mustangs, the Mustang Bs, which are these sort of Merlin pattern. Actually, they're Packard built under license Mustangs, and they first go into action, I think, if I remember rightly, the 10th of December 43, and then they're starting to build up in January, and the second fighter group, the 4 fighter group, the legendary 4 fighter group, gets them equipped by the end of February 1944. And by the middle of April 1944, they've absolutely, they've got enough. They've won air superiority. D-Day can go ahead, and everything, problem solved. Yeah. God, that was a long-winded answer to that one. But
it's
really interesting.
A good answer. And the thing is, there's film, isn't there? The Memphis Belle movie, that the David Putnam film that people will maybe know, is based on.
I really like that film.
But the real footage of the actual film crew that went up. If you want to, wonder whether you need fresh underwear, because it's extremely frightening, that film where they're attacked by the Luftwaffe fighters, herring in as fast as they can from out of the sun, the guys at their gun stations firing. If you really want to shit yourself, that's
well, and the other
worth a
interesting thing
watch.
about it is actually you think because of all this armory that they should be more effective, but if you're a waist gunner, for example, you've got this little window out to the elements. And just imagine this, you're at kind of 20,000 feet, it's minus 45. You've got a sort of heated suit, but what happens if one of the wires gets shortened or something like that? You're absolutely stuffed. You're actually full of, a Focke-Wulf going past you goes like that, and you've missed it. It's gone. Even if you're in the tail section where you have to sit actually on a little sort of bike seat with your knees tucked, your legs tucked backwards under your thighs. You have to sit there. Because you've got a twin machine gun. Even though you're at the end of the plane, actually your vision is really, really limited.
Yep.
It's absolutely pathetic, frankly. And while there is a 0.002% that a shell from an anti-aircraft gun will hit you, the chance of you being hit in an attack by a fighter plane is something like 1 in 4.
Yeah.
So, if you've got to do 25 of these missions. The odds are just of you surviving unscathed are just, you will get hit at some point, and it's just whether you manage to make it back or not.
Right then. Well, time for a quick bit of R&R. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. We haven't suddenly turned into a podcast about cupcakes. By the way, welcome to our new listeners. We seem to be gathering up quite a few stragglers who've lost their battalion. You're all very welcome. Keep your rifle clean. Morale is high, and we're hoping to get you all home by Christmas. More questions, James?
Yes. Well, this is from Manfred from Gonagal. Manfred von Gonagal. Good name. Was King Victor Emmanuel of Italy ever accused or referred to for potential war crimes as a result of his complicity with Mussolini's regime? More broadly, were there war crime tribunals mounted against fascist Italians?
Well, the tribunals that were mounted were pretty sort of like things that happened in the street and they ended up on a meat hook. I mean, the thing is because Italy, changed sides because the Italians
signed an armistice.
They
became co-belligerents.
And this is and that's before unconditional surrender becomes the the be all and end all of the Allied effort, doesn't it?
No, it's after.
It's
after. But it's unconditional surrender for Nazi Germany, but not for Italy.
That's interesting.
Yep.
That's really interesting, isn't it?
Because unconditional surrender is agreed at the Casablanca Conference in January 1943. So Italian surrender, official surrender, although it's agreed in August, doesn't come into play until the 8th of September 1943.
So why is there an exception for the Italians?
Well, because they're not as bad, They've still got a king. They've still got a king. They've still got King Victor Emmanuel. I mean, it's interesting because Mussolini is never the kind of absolute kind of dictator that Hitler is in the same way, because there is a king, and he is answerable to the mob. And this is one of the, he always is, that he can be overthrown at any minute, as is proved on the 25th of August 1943 when he is overthrown.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one. And the truth of the matter is they are supposed to be co-belligerents. So they are, the Allies just cannot stomach them being allies, part of the coalition.
Yeah.
So they have to, they fudge it with this kind of terminology, which is you are a co-belligerent. So you're sort of on our side now, but we still don't like you. It's basically the kind of the subtext. And what is supposed to happen is that Monty has already landed with 8th Army at the Southern Toe on the 1st of September. Then 5th Army under Mark Clark lands at Salerno. And at that moment, the Italians are supposed to all come over onto the side of the Allies. But the Germans have smelt a rat, know exactly what's going on, and have got Operation Axis in place. Mm. And they've already streamed lots of German troops into it. And the moment the surrender happens, they just pour into all the Italian camps and disarm the whole lot. And all the Italians are so shocked by this and were so not expecting it that they don't know what to do. And basically, I mean, this is Captain Corelli's mandolin and Kefalonia and all the rest of it. And so they disarm them. And what happens is Marshal Badoglio and Victor Emmanuel, they leave Rome. They sort of bugger off really quickly and head to Brindisi, I think it is. And there they set up, the Royal Army.
But he's forced to abdicate, isn't he?
He's forced to abdicate. So that is the kind of sort of the quid pro quo. And his son, who's a, pretty feckless, useless individual, takes over as king.
Right. Excellent.
Yeah, so that's what happens. So the long and short of it is that there aren't any trials because all the kind of big players are killed. So Pavellini is a person who is the head of the fascist party after Mussolini is kind of captured and put in Grand Sasso, and then he's sprung famously by Otto Skorzeny and everything, and put back in power. But he remains, even though Mussolini is put back as sort of head of state of the Socialist Republic of Italy in the north, Pavellini remains head of the fascist party. He's strung up at the same time and executed at the same time that because they were captured by partisans, so they're trying to flee up through the Alps.
Yeah.
And same as Mussolini, of course.
So, yes, summary tribunals, as it were. Okay, Jared Halliwell asks, had Germany taken the time to build more tanks and armour beforehand, do you think this could have swayed the outcome of the war? Well, the thing is here, it's opportunity. All the economists would call this opportunity cost, wouldn't they? Because if you're spending money on one thing, you can't spend it on another. This is only so much money. Right?
Yep.
But this is explaining pocket money to my kids. Right?
Yep.
If you've spent the money on the chalk ice, you can't have the packet of crisps. Right?
Yep.
And this applies to German economics before the Second World War as much as it does to anything else. Because if they had built more tanks and armour beforehand, they wouldn't have been able to build more submarines or aeroplanes or whatever. This is the point, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I think their kind of biggest mistake entering the war is that they don't build enough submarines.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have just completely binned all those pocket battleships and heavy cruisers, the Bismarck and the Gneisenau and the Scharnhorst. I just wouldn't have even gone there. I'd have, part of the Z plan, which is the pre-war naval plan, is to build 300 U-boats, and I would have made that my absolute top priority rather than making a massive battleship, which looks great and makes Hitler feel like like
a naval power.
But
imperial naval power.
But as 1917 proved, the only way they got close to winning the First World War is by kind of strangling the supplies crossing the Atlantic, and that's how to defeat the Allies, the Western Allies, in the Second World War, in the coming war. And they don't do that, and so you have this ludicrous situation that in the summer of 1940, when they have most of the convoys going across the Atlantic are unescorted, a bit like the bomber forces going to Regensburg in 1943 before they've learned the hard way. There are no more than 14 U-boats operating at one time ever in the entire Atlantic. And you can argue very convincingly, and that the Atlantic is the key battleground of the entire Second World War, because that is where supplies go, whether they're going to the Soviet Union, whether they're going to Britain, whether they're coming, whatever everything goes through the Atlantic to get to Britain, which is the launch pad, or goes through the Atlantic to get to the Soviet Union. There is no alternative. So that has to be, the moment it goes beyond a kind of short, sharp 6-week campaign and goes into a long attritional bloody war that's going to last best part of 6 years, it's all about supplies. And supplies go through the Atlantic. And they just don't prioritise that. And it's a really, really bad mistake. But the other interesting thing about it is it's not a question of having time to build more tanks. They don't have the capacity to build more tanks, because what's really interesting is we always talk about the Nazi war machine in the Second World War, particularly in the Blitzkrieg years, when in actual fact they're not very machine heavy. And this is one of the kind of ironies about the Germans, is that, and you can find all this stuff out by looking at the Whitaker's Almanacs of the 1930s, which lists how many vehicles there were per population and all sorts of other useless, pointless information. Except it's not useless and pointless if you're me or some other historian and you're interested in all this stuff. Because what you learn, and I can't remember the figures precisely, but I think it's something like there are 106 Italians for every vehicle in Italy, despite them having Fiat and Alfa Romeo and things. Whereas that figure is 47 in Germany, despite having Mercedes and BMW and Audi and Hawk. Whereas that figure is 14 in the UK, is 8 in France, and it's 3 in the USA, which is probably no great surprise there. But France is the most automotive society in Western Europe by quite a big margin. Britain is the second. Germany is the third, but at 47 compared to 14 and 8.
So the question should really be, had the UK taken the time to build more tanks and armour beforehand, do you think this would have swayed the outcome of the war?
Well, maybe. But one of the problems that the British have is they have the 1930s Road Traffic Act, which restricts the tonnage of lorries on the roads, because they want freight to continue to use railways.
Yeah.
And so they limit the weight of lorries that you can have on British roads, which means that when you get to the Second World War, there just isn't that infrastructure for building large vehicles and large tanks. And it's exactly the same issue that they have in Germany, except much worse. Because if you're not a very automotive society, you can't just click your fingers and suddenly create lots of factories. And that means you don't have mechanics who have the knowledge. You don't have garages all over the place, and you don't have sort of petrol stations, and you don't have people who know how to drive. You can't magic it, which is why when they attack in May 1940, for example, with their 135 divisions, only 16 of them are motorised. And it's why they used almost double the number of horses in the Second World War. But
that's also why they do that concentrated punch, because that's their only option.
It's their only option. It's a tip of the spear.
Right.
The
Okay.
long shot
So
is.
now I was digging through my Second World War tut. And I found this, I was given ages ago. Originally it sold for 5 shillings. And this is a thing called 10 Chapters. It's a small, slim black volume, 1942 to 1945. And this little book is a short and personal account of my activities in outline from August 42 to May 45. I took command of the 8th Army, the Western Desert of Egypt. This is like a who am I question. Western Desert of Egypt on 30th of August 1942. He does wear a beret.
Has he got a little moustache?
The German war ended on the 8th of May 1945. It's been a long journey from Alamein to the Baltic Sea.
It's Monty.
It's Monty. At various stages in that journey, the Prime Minister, Mr. Churchill, wrote a page in my autograph book and recorded his impressions in his own handwriting. These pages have been photographed exactly as they're written, and they form the main feature of this book. The autograph book is itself in my possession, as I suppose, of great historical value. How very modest of you, Monty. So this is a book that's a facsimile of the notes written by Churchill in Monty's autograph book. So that's interesting that an autograph book is a nerd. And various autographs and signatures.
I love seeing all those. You've got Patton's signature, Omar Bradley's, Ramsey's. I mean, they're all there, aren't they?
Yeah. So chapter 6. So before that, you've got chapter 5 is the run up to D-Day. So you've got autographs from the planning meeting. So Smuts is in here from South Africa. Mackenzie.
What does it say on that? There's a great line on that page, the one with Smuts' signature.
Good luck in your new hunt, Smuts.
That's amazing. That wasn't the one I was thinking
Field
of. But
Marshal Smuts. Well, that'll do, wouldn't it?
That'll do, though, yeah.
At Churchill, chapter 5, on the verge of the greatest adventure with which these pages have dealt, I record my confidence that all will be well and that the organisation and equipment of the army, and he runs out of room on that page, so the army goes down the side a little bit, will be, oh gosh, and I can't read his handwriting. Churchill's handwriting that's a man who's doing 1 million documents a day and having to just scribble on them. Some poor sod decipher
I recall my confidence that all will be well and that the organisation and equipment of the army will be worthy of the valour of the soldiers.
There we are. And then the page when he gets to Germany's written.
And in the genius of their chief.
There we are. It's brilliant.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah, no, where was the other Smuts one?
And you've got, when they get to Germany's in red pen at the top of the page as a little addition. And he took the...
No, this is it. This is it. Okay, June the 12th, 1944. So it was in the beginning, so it may continue to the end, Winston Churchill. And so it will, Smuts.
Yeah.
And so it will.
And then there's the autographs of the Germans who came to negotiate the surrender on the 3rd of May in 45. He got their autographs. I mean, that's niche autograph hunting, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, look, they've even got de Gaulle.
Yeah.
The excellent
James is
armies
speechless, ladies
of
and gentlemen.
Well, I am, just because he's written something quite nice in there.
Really?
Yeah.
De Gaulle's written something nice.
To General Montgomery, the excellent armies of victory. 15th of June.
Yeah, but it's like a visitor's book, though. You're never going to write, God, that breakfast was shit.
Yeah. You're a bit of a...
Yeah. Bed was uncomfortable. Yeah, I mean, it's... that we have here, we've General Admiral von Friedenberg, General Kinsell, Rear Admiral Wagner, and Major Friedel, who are the people who came to the TAC HQ for the surrender, underlined German officers sent to my HQ by Field Marshal Keitel to discuss surrender. Date 3rd May 1945, place Lüneburg. So that's the very end game. There's famous photos, and I think it's Chester Wilmot's account of the Germans turning up and Monty putting on a real act because he'd been
refusing to shake their hand.
Yeah, refusing, and he'd obviously been rehearsing that moment in his head for quite a while. Anyway, it's an intriguing little book.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Right.
I've never seen that before.
Okay,
Brilliant.
well, now then at Ease Young Holland, time for a pint of dark mild.
Which I'm guessing means we've run out of time. God, you really could just keep yammering on this for hours.
That's the plan, isn't it?
Shh. Anyway, if you missed any of the books we recommended, we'll tweet them out again soon, and do let us know what you think of them if you do get around to reading them.
Brilliant. Get in touch with us on Twitter using the hashtag WeHaveWays or using the snappy email wehavewayspodcast@gmail.com. See you all next time.
Yep, cheerio.